Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. Tuesday, March 25th, just completed the individual sitting for today. And I want to make a voiceover that's going to go in the Journey series. I believe the one I'm working on is the 185th. Um, Today is the day that the scandal is breaking with Trump, just to give some timeline and perspective about a leak in the one of the Defense Department secretary and a bunch of his cronies invited a liberal reporter onto their messaging, and they released this stuff. The war plans for bombing the people in Yemen, the Houthis. But anyways, that's not what this is about. So I'm going to put this at the end of my next video for all my viewers, and then this is going to go in the Journey series, and also it's going to go in a separate video on the Gratefullness meditation channel. There are two comments that were left to me where people were quoting from the Sahaj Marg mission literature. And, people are finding these books online. Some of them are, there's books that you can read that are PDFs. There are also books that are out there on, Amazon or eBay and used books, things like this. And I don't know if the Sahaj Marg bookstore is still there. I have some information on the Gratefullness meditation channel about reading the various books and things. And I was given a couple of comments, and then I watched a little video with the third master of the system charger, which I found interesting, and I want to talk a little bit about that. But on the Gratefullness meditation channel, I have things to do with death, preparing for death. I was giving some sittings on that in that playlist to prepare for death. Things that you could that are specifically about that. And I'm going to continue to add to that playlist, and this is going to be part of that playlist, because one of my viewers left this comment here. And the person writes, it's the Sahaj Marg Educational Series Volume 1. And so this person left the title of the book and the page number. The other person didn't and wouldn't know to do so, but I want to comment about that when we get to the other book, the other comment. But it's just, I'll just comment about it here. In Sahaj Marg, when you're talking about anything, you're reading these books and these passages, you always want to have the exact title of the book and the page number so people can find the quote, because it might resonate with them and they want to read maybe some of the other parts of it, some of the other things that went along with it. So it's always good to, to be more like, to document these things. So this is, I'm not sure, the Sahaj Marg Educational Series, I can't remember what that one's about. I don't have a picture of that book in my mind, but, I've read all these books. So, okay, so I just looked it up. So there's two books. One's called Meditation, one's called Cleaning. I think there might have been a third book, I'm not sure. But these were two books with, this guy Ferdinand took all the quotes that were available, I think by all three of the masters. This is pre-Dodgy. And that had to do with meditation, and another one that had to do with the cleaning process. And so that you could learn about those two specific things. And so I read those books a long time ago, but, and this quote might be something I'm familiar with. I mean, I've heard this quote before from another location, because these are from talks and other things. But Master Charji said, at death, the mind should be made a complete blank. No thoughts must be allowed to come into it, not even of gods or anything like that. It must be made completely blank so that at death, it can merge with the source, where the condition is that of nothingness. And I tell you, for the Abhyasis, aspirants, one who practices yoga in order to achieve union with God, so that's in parentheses, of our Santha, spiritual tradition, organization, or group. The word Santha, Sanstha, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I've heard it before, but this is very easy, because this is what they are taught to do every time they sit in meditation. To use this becomes second nature. When we sit in meditation, the mind becomes thoughtless. So what we are experiencing, to put it one way, is a condition somewhat like that at death. You call it a condition of death in life, if you like. So when the time comes, we automatically get into this state of mind, and there is no impediment, even at the last moment. And I guess this quote is from Babaji, the second master of the system, pages 138 and 139. So I can say after years of doing this practice, thoughtlessness isn't the goal of the meditation, but you get into thoughtless states. And there's various points you can meditate on, which will bring to a thoughtless state. There's point B in the heart region. There's two. There's point 1 and there's point A and B. In that point 1, the first point on the left side of the bottom of the chest area. And I've showed you the yatra picture and various talks and things. And when you meditate on point B, it brings you to a thoughtless state. But just the meditation itself, and I hadn't tried this in maybe ever, but maybe 5 years ago, I just sat there and I was like, I wonder if I could just not think about anything and be in a thoughtless state. And I was able to achieve it fairly easily because of just doing this meditation for years. And the reason why a person would be in a thoughtless state when they die is you wouldn't want to attach to anything. Like you want to go to wherever, the highest level of your possible highest level of your approach to God, the closest you could get to God. And so having a thoughtless state and just being completely open to where your soul goes when it leaves the body. And I don't want to make it sound like it's some sort of a traveling, something where you go from New York to Los Angeles or something, right? It's not like that. It's, you're going through a different layers of consciousness. And thoughtlessness is the way to do it, right? So any sort of attachment, anything that you think about, anything that's, that would impede that process, right? That's why they burn the bodies in India. And, people are told you're supposed to grieve for a little bit of time. You have to. That's a natural process. It's what you're supposed to do anyway, right? You grieve for your loved ones. But then you have to let them go. And the reason they burn the bodies is sometimes a soul will hang around the body, even though the body's dead. If there's unfinished business, if they died sort of a quick death, there's some maybe surprise, shock or surprise in their death process. And they'll hang around their body. And so if you burn their body, they go somewhere else, right? Their soul will just go to where it's supposed to go. Plus, if you're thinking about them, you keep on pulling the soul back to you, right? Because the soul's connected to you. You have some connection through love with your loved ones. And so at some point you have to just let the soul go. It needs to go to where it has to return and these things, right? When this medium showed up, this French woman who does the Whispers of the Brighter World messages, Master Charji received messages from his wife who had been dead since 1995. He started receiving these messages, I think, in the early 1999, early 2000s. And then some messages from his mom who died when he was 5. And these messages were given, and then there was, like this idea that their soul wanted to return to where where it wouldn't have access to earth and, earthly consciousness, right? These souls wanted to move on to something else. And so, this is a good way to think about it. But, it's, again, I'm putting this in the playlist about, preparing for death and these things, which is what this meditation ultimately does is it connects you with the place you're going, the etheric worlds where you're going, wherever you're going to go when you die. You're preparing for that transition. And, it's something that, we all should be doing because death is inevitable. It's one of the great things about the Sahaj Marg system because you have an earthly life and you have a spiritual life, and the life of your spirit it gets more enhanced as you get older and closer to death. And, attending to your spiritual life and meditating and connecting to this, other part of your existence, your non-material part of your existence, helps you transition when you die, right? So this is important stuff, but people don't want to think about their death, so there's that reason. So the other person left a comment, and again, the person didn't know this, but whenever you leave a comment, you have to, like I said, this person said, I'm currently reading the Principles of Sahaj Marg by Charji. So I think there's some nice books that they printed, like a hardbound copy of the Principles of Sahaj Marg. And then I had some of the old ones that they printed in India. and the pages would just rip out. You had to glue the pages back in because they were poorly bound. They were cheap books. But I think there was 15 or 20 of the principles of Sahaj Marg. So Charji gave lots of talks, similar to what I mean, not similar to, but, this kind of thing that I do on YouTube is what Charji used to do at gatherings. But his was, about the Sahaj Marg system. And the talks he gave in India were published in a series of books called The Principles of Sahaj Marg. And I think the book this person has, there's 3 volumes in it, volume 1, 2, and 3. And the talks that he gave in Europe and in America were entitled Heart to Heart. And so there was, I think, 20 of those books that were published. Eventually, some of these talks made it onto DVDs and things like that. And these things are floating around. I mean, some people have some of them, and some of them end up on eBay and things like this. So he says, I'm currently reading The Principles of Sahaj Marg by Charji, and in the chapter Reality Unveiled, he writes about newcomers of the Sahaj Marg receiving experiences deliberately granted by the Master to bring connection into the mind that there is something here. This alludes to what Paul was saying about receiving God's help. As a 2 and a bit year newbie myself, I definitely vouch for this. The more I work for God, the more God works for me. Thanks, Paul. Have a blessed day, all. I had this tremendous, probably maybe my biggest experience in my first initial sittings. And it was probably the only reason I stayed with Sahaj Marg's system, because I didn't like to meditate. And, I've come to really need it and, just do it automatically. But, before I started Sahaj Marg, I tried it and didn't like it. And so I wasn't really interested in meditation, but I felt some energy. I was given this sort of a pamphlet, some printout, like some Xerox copy of a talk by this guy Charji. And I read it, and I felt some vibrations in the heart, and it said something about the heart. And I never thought about my heart, either my physical heart or my etheric heart. But I tried the meditation, and I had these profound experiences. And it really sold me on the system. That was all I needed. I knew there was something special here because it was just, these mind-blowing experiences. But, now I don't know, I don't have those kind of experiences because the meditation itself is, the condition that's there is much more subtle. And, the experiences don't need to be there because I'm not, they're not necessary. And, the system itself isn't about experiences. It's about connecting to God, which is subtle. And so, people who don't feel something big happening, it doesn't need, that's not what's supposed to be happening. But if you get those experiences, they convince you, and that's the good thing about it. But eventually you forget about the experience because you can't remember, you can't re-experience the experience. You can remember how great it was and how profound it was. But it's not something that you necessarily can take with you and re-experience again later on. So it's the day-to-day practice and meditation that you feel connected to God in a very subtle way, and how it helps cope with stress and move forward. And there's things that you're changing in you for the better that you can recognize as progress. And so that was what makes the system great, in that way. But, people need reasons to do something, and especially Americans and people, Europeans, that, big experiences are almost mandatory for them to stick with something. So, just a few more things to say. I want to comment on this talk I was listening to. I got about halfway through it. I'm going to listen to the rest of it when I'm done with this when I'm making dinner. So, the Sahaj Marg system, there was 6 preceptors, all American, not Indian people, in my area. Most of the preceptors were Indian. They were, mostly Indian citizens who were working in America, and they grew up in America. They grew up in India. And so they're very, they were, they're Indian traditionally, and they had a different understanding about, the master-disciple relationship, which is a big thing in India, and they came from a different religion and a different culture. And, I would go to these different preceptors and get sittings and talk about Sahaj Marg with them. And then we'd have these gatherings. Chargy would come to America, and there would be these big gatherings in the ashram. There's, I think around 1,000 people that used to go to them. And I made friends and people who I, were like me. And then going to India and seeing people from all over the world. Some of them old-time people, people who are, mentioned in books and, had been around for big events in the system and things like this. And they all had their different perspective and different ways of relating to the system. And some of them had issues, like some of the American people had issues with the cultural differences. And, Chargy talks about some of the cultural attitudes towards sex and other things. I'll show you I'll make a screenshot of the talk here in a second. But anyways, there was a whole smorgasbord of different personalities and different people. And I learned a lot from their practice and their struggles and they sometimes struggle with some of the teachings or some of the rules or whatever it might be, right? Some of these different cultural aspects of this system. And that's unfortunately doesn't exist. And so people here just have me. And that certainly isn't really a great thing. People are just hearing about Sahaj Marg from me and my experiences. People listen to the Journey series and the sittings that are given and, these other things. And they can find some of these books. And I'm glad people are finding the books and, having their own experiences, reading the books, doing the practice and, relating to it that way. Because it's just not, it's not supposed to be only one person, especially when that person isn't the master. It'd be one thing if there was, one of the masters was still alive. We had a master in someone who had mastered themselves and was the embodiment of the practical embodiment, the experiential embodiment of the practice, where they had reached this goal of God realization, the mergence with the divine, and they emanated out of they used to emanate this energy. When you were around them, it was like their presence and the energy that they were exuding and the way they lived, and you could observe them and be around them, and there's it's just not there, and it's it's unfortunately a sucky thing because this guy Dodgy shit the bed. He crapped out when he had the potential to be one of these people, and it's said over and over again the master system is kind of imperative, is essential to the system, and that sucks. But right now the meditation's still working, the transmission's still flowing. And there's, good things about it. And people are having this experience, the gratefulness meditation we do. But, it's limited. And, people have to do more. And they have to figure things out on their own to some extent, right? They have to really connect with the master within. And because there isn't much of a support system and organization. There's the website, the YouTube channel that I've made. And there's the teachings and all the things that I can, that I can say personally and the works and the writings that are there. And, but it's a limited thing. It's unfortunate. I went and made dinner, and I went for a walk with my dog, and I listened to the rest of the Chargy talk. It's an epic talk. The title of the talk is, here, let me give it to the website there. Reverend Chargy Talk, Duty and Responsibility, 2007, July. He, the Hook, and I. SRMC, and it's from Sahaj Marg, S-A, they have the picture there. That's how you spell it. And Sahaj Marg YouTube channel, which is the original channel, then Heartfulness took over. Sahaj Marg was the original name, and then Daji thought up this Heartfulness scam, and it's a separate organization, and he's, according to people that are anti-Daji, telling me that he is glomming all the properties and this was a collective Sahaj Marg, which belonged to, everybody in a sense. And he personally owns the Heartfulness thing, right? So, real, piece of shit move on his part. There's like $1 billion in assets. So I was listening to this talk, I was cutting my hair, I was doing a bunch of things. And he told a story, Chargy. Well, first, the Hook, and I talks were these sort of expensive talks, and maybe it was like $100-something, and we couldn't buy it at the time, whatever it was released. And they were talks that Chargy was giving, very informal talks about his time with Babaji, his master, the second master of the system, who smoked a hookah. Babaji barely ate, and he had a bad toothache, and someone said if you smoke tobacco, it helps with the pain. So he's got in the habit of smoking. And Lalaji, the first master of the system, said to him, why are you smoking? He said, well, I have the toothache. He said, well, if you're going to smoke, use the hookah. It's better, it purifies the smoke, it's better for you. And Babaji had this hookah that they used to pack with charcoal and with tobacco and with jaggery. And he would sit around in his courtyard and he would talk to people, visitors from all over the world. And, there was this sound of the hookah, and, he would smoke the hookah and he would, say these, profound things to them and do spiritual work on them. And Charji gave these informal talks, and I thought I had heard them. I probably heard this one before. I had listened to all of them. At some point, I had the book. They put it in a book format at some point. But he was telling this story about how when he was, I guess I can't remember what his age was, but he was just, he was in college years. And he went to Italy. He traveled in Europe, and, he lived in India, but he traveled in Europe. And he got off the, wherever it is, a plane or wherever he got there. He was taking a bus to the hotel, and some guy in a Porsche wanted to give him a ride, and he said no, he didn't trust the guy, and said he would just go and take the bus. And the guy ends up stopping the bus and asks him again if he wants to, go with him. And he says no, and then Charji gets to the hotel, and the guy's trying to cancel his reservation at the hotel. I think Charji was with some other people, some other young men or whatever. And they're like, and Charji's like, get out of here, I'm going to call the cops, right? What are you doing? And later he found out the guy was a homosexual that was predatory. And, obvious, whatever. And it stunned him because he never, experienced anything like this in India. And, it sort of made him jaded against the European cultures. And, he said even now there was some of this, I don't want to call it prejudice, but it still lingered, which I thought was kind of interesting. Now, I hadn't heard that particular talk or story before. Some of the stories he tells I'd heard before. But it's an excellent talk in terms of duty and, your responsibilities and duty, which he says, at some point, those things disappear and it's just pure devotion and service to God, right? And as Babaji put it, service to his master. And it's an excellent talk. There's people who do the Sahaj Marg system who never did the meditation. They wouldn't get these sittings. They wouldn't go to satsang, which is group meditation. They wouldn't get individual sittings. They wouldn't do their personal practice, but they love the master, and they spend as much time with him as possible, in the atmosphere, the environment, or they would just go to meditation when Charji was giving the sittings or something. The other people who really were devotional and loved to do the work, and they volunteered for lots of things and did a lot of work. Other people were really into the literature and the intellectual aspect of the system. They all had their preferences. This is why I was talking about earlier, that when you just have me as the lone person who does the system, it kind of sucks. And there's lots of great people, like saintly people and really interesting people from all over the world that do the meditation. People who are higher developed souls. And it's unfortunately that wealth has been lost because of this, this cult thing that Daji's formed. And it's a real bummer. And, especially now when everything's going to crap. I also just listened to I did a little extra clip of Trump and his frickin', his non-responsibility for classified documents, right? And just another, way America's, we're going straight to the, destruction aspect of our system. And, which is predicted and worked on and, made happen by the divine forces behind the Sahaj Marg system. So, this is all something I'm aware of, but, it's going to be difficult for all of us to transition from whatever our life is now to a life without all the privileges and things that we have. But anyways, I was thinking about all these things that I myself, in terms of my own spiritual practice, my own duty and devotion to God. He talks about a dog, how dogs are so devotional at the end of the talk. But, why I do the things I do. Like, it's sort of automatic at this point. I don't even think about it, like in terms of doing whatever I do with the Gratefullness meditation and doing these videos and talking about the Sahaj Marg system and, whatever my abilities and role is here. But, I'm also quite jaded and resistant to getting overwhelmed by, people and their bullshit because of what's happened already, things I experienced, being worn out. I mean, even from my family situation, my kids and all that, and just, the disappointment of all of it. I mean, even if it isn't disappointing, like I take it as something that's been good for me and, for my spiritual well-being. I'm well aware that people will let you down. And so, I've been hesitant to, I mean, there's just so much I'm willing to commit to. Somebody asked me for personal sittings, but everything that I could offer in a long distance sitting is there in the Gratefulness Meditation YouTube channel. There was a couple, I guess, who aren't able to feel the transmission. And, I don't know what to do about that, but, it's, if you do it enough and maybe pray about it, like, pray and find some way. I don't know what it is. I should make a separate video about this, way to become more sensitive. I've added some of the sensitivity suggestions. Maybe I could do a sitting where people will meditate on that and, pray about that and as well. Put that in a separate playlist, do those occasionally. And I could read the preceptor book about that. And that's something that's been on my mind to do. I just have to get the time. But anyways, I was thinking about all these things and my own personal contribution and why I do what I do. And, it's just, after a while, you don't even think about motivation. Like, I don't need, there's a point where I wanted to maybe prove myself or, when I was younger or different things, these types of things. But at some point, it just becomes, you do it because you're supposed to. Like, you just, there's no thought of duty. There's no thought of responsibility. As you get older, you're just doing what you're supposed to do because it's what you're supposed to do, right? And it's, kind of a nice place to be in. And considering, it's different for each person because of the, it's hard to really relate to the master-disciple relationship in America. And, what it means and, how important it is and, how, and people don't want to get into some sort of cult situation and they don't want to give up their personal sovereignty and their ability to, think they're going to be ordered around or be, enslaved in some way, like a master-slave relationship, which the connotation for Europe and America is that it's a master-slave relationship. But it's, a master and somebody who's master themselves, and you are working to achieve the achievements that they've personally achieved, right? You're working to accomplish what they've accomplished, and that's, binding yourself to a guide in a sense and having them help you make it up the mountain, the spiritual mountain. But anyways, these are just some thoughts about the thing. I can hear my dogs bark. I think my wife just got home, so I'm going to go have dinner and stuff. Anyways, kind of interesting. I'm glad, that I listened to that talk. And, there's a lot of good stuff in that Sahaj Marg channel. And, maybe someday there'll be some sort of community and people will, read the books and do the stuff. And, there'll be different ways of perceiving, how you relate to this practice and not just one person. I mean, that's just really unfortunate. And it kind of sucks that the person's me for you guys. But, it's the way it is. And, I'm so focused on the truther stuff. The other people, I mean, there's very few real truthers or even partial truthers in Sahaj Marg because they're, I wouldn't say they're sheeple, but they're not really into the stuff, they're, especially the culture, the Indian culture. The masters were in their own way, but, not like we are because, everything was from God. So they didn't have this sense of like, I mean, there's good and evil, but they're not thinking about it in some way like we do, right? It's just, there's good and evil and they're good and evil are there for a reason. But anyways, let me wrap this one up here. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.